Joining me now to talk about her class at the upcoming Illustrator Virtual Summit is Kara Plichnich. Thanks for joining me, Clara.
Oh, it's always my treat, Dave.
Awesome. So, one of the things we like to do in these summits is obviously have a range of classes, and we know that there are people that are approaching Illustrator for maybe for the first time coming from Photoshop angle. So, one of the classes you're doing is Illustrator for Photoshop users, kind of touching on that a little bit. So, give us an idea of what you're going to be looking at in that session.
Yeah, well, Illustrator is one of those things that I wanted to learn so badly, and I tried so many different ways in my life at so many different times, and I just could never get it. And it finally clicked. And I think one of the things that surprisingly sort of held me back was my Photoshop brain. And I mean, even if you understand the difference between vector, obviously, and pixels, it's still like it's just a different world. And I think my mental framework was kind of locking me in and making it hard to see what was right in front of me previously. So I love being able to help others overcome that virtual hurdle that I had by really pointing out some of the differences. So, we'll talk about some of the silly, like just interface type differences. For example, like in Photoshop, we have the options bar or control panel or whatever we call it these days. But in Illustrator, we do have that, but that's not where you find like tool options.
hmm
And so for the longest time, it was like, how do I even just like adjust this tool? And I thought you just couldn't.
hmm
But the answer is you have to double click on the tool. I mean, it's just like little
Yeah.
silly things like that that make it so hard to feel like you can even function in the software. So lots of little stuff like that. And like another thing that tripped me up a lot was when people talk about expanding artwork. I was like, why?
Yeah.
What does
Yeah.
that mean?
Right.
Like, it looks the same
hmm
visually when I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. It looks the same, and I don't understand why we're doing this. And I would ask people who I thought would have been able to tell me, but they just kind of said, "Oh, because you have to." And I was like, "But why?"
Yeah, that's not a reason.
Yeah, like, I don't get it. And how come sometimes it says expand appearance and sometimes it just says expand? What the heck? And so those are all things that somehow finally my brain finally figured it out. And for those of you who that made perfect sense for from the beginning, well, lucky you. It wasn't that way for me. And I used to always feel bad about it. And now I'm just like, you know what? That's because my brain was very tuned into the
hmm
pixel world.
Yeah.
And also because nobody explained it before.
And I
So
know for a lot of people, the big starting point that's a stumbling block is layers, because in
yep.
Photoshop, we live and
Yes,
breathe layers, whereas in Illustrator, it's almost like optional. Like some people never use
totally.
layers because you don't necessarily need to. So that for some people, it's like, what? Getting
Yes.
kind of
And
past
and
that
and a
idea.
layer is almost more like a folder with layers because
hmm
everything essentially becomes its own layer. It is very
Yep.
confusing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk about all that stuff. And I'm looking at my list here. There's a lot. And even like groups, how groups work in Illustrator and why Illustrator seems to just like love groups. It makes groups out of nothing. It
hmm
just it loves them. And all those things, like once you kind of get what's happening and you understand like, oh, that's just Illustrator or that's just the nature of vectors or whatever, then you're like, okay, now I can work with this.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole plan.
Awesome. Well, that sounds going to be very helpful for those people coming from
I hope
the
so.
Photoshop side.
Yeah.
All right,
I
and your
really
other class is talking about shapes, which is another interesting angle because a lot of people feel they hear about the pen tool and feel like they need to go into Illustrator knowing how to draw or how to use the pen tool to create things, whereas it's not necessarily the case.
Yes, and this is another I mean, when I say I spent, like, a really long time trying to understand Illustrator, I'm not exaggerating. I did not get it, and I would follow tutorials and do the whole thing, but, like, somehow I wasn't understanding the why behind all of this stuff. And so drawing and the pen tool is a whole other issue because I'm not an illustrator, right? Like, I'm not some amazing drawer artists of that nature. But I I can draw. I can use a pencil and I can make a thing. I can sketch out something and it looks like something. And then I come into Illustrator and I was trying to do it the same way and you just don't. That's like a dead end, a false start. And so when you have that notion that you draw in Illustrator, I think for a lot of people, that can also be a virtual hurdle
Yeah.
because what we're really doing generally for maybe some of us, most of us, is building. And it is not the same. Like if you want to draw a coffee cup with a pencil, that's simple. In Illustrator, total different thing.
Hmm.
Also simple, but a completely different construction process.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that to at least I did to be able to again feel functional in Illustrator. So I love showing how you can take basic shapes like a circle and a rectangle and you can use them to build whatever it is you're trying to build.
Hmm.
And even we'll talk about the pen tool too, because you have to, and the pen tool's not the devil. But it is like a little squirrel sometimes. You have to learn how to operate it. Um, but you can do things like what I call constellation drawing, which is just clicking and making like a connect the dots type thing. And you can go in after the fact and very easily edit the lines to get them where you want.
Hmm.
And so there are ways to do it all. And it doesn't involve drawing as we would think in the traditional sense.
Right.
And I think that's um validating for people who want to create with Illustrator, but they're like, maybe they are not an illustrator in, the hands-on world. Um, and so you don't have to be able to use Illustrator. You just have
Right.
to know how to build stuff. And so that I can do. So
Yeah.
it'll be fun.
And I know, speaking personally, right from day one of Illustrator, I mean, the pen tool at the time was the number one tool, and I certainly felt like I mastered it. But once I looked at the idea of making things using shapes, I started looking at things differently. Like if I was looking at a
Mhm.
sketch or something, instead of thinking I have to trace that with the pen tool, I would think, well, that's kind of an oval and a rectangle and a triangle. If they're overlapped, I can, as you said,
Exactly.
construct that shape as opposed to have to draw it from square one.
That's such a game changer, and it's like every time I teach it, I'm almost, like, embarrassed how completely I mean, it's a really good, like, example of human psychology and how your own framework can really blind you or be such a roadblock, and once you just kind of crack that open, then you're like, "Oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
get it now," and it's incredible, and it took me so long and I just ugh. So I love being able to facilitate that hopefully for other people, for
And I
sure.
what I love about what you just said is, to me, that's kind of almost like the definition of a summit like this is it's going to introduce you to other ways of thinking that you might not have approached before. Even if you're a seasoned Illustrator user, you're going to watch a class and go, I never even thought about using a tool that way. So it's just opening up your brain to, to new possibilities, no matter where you are on the scale of beginner to experienced user. They're watching a class. And I always say this, watch a class that at first glance you're thinking, this class, the description doesn't necessarily interest me. It's
Mhm.
still worth watching because somewhere along the way an instructor is going to show something that's going to make you go, oh,
Oh, yeah, they're
I
gonna,
hadn't
like,
thought of it that way.
casually drop a nugget that you're like, "That was pure gold." Yeah, that's what happens. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
exactly. Fantastic. Well, Kara, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to chat about your classes.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to the event.